We are approaching this topic humbly. We're not up here, so Alex aside, we're not up here pretending to be experts by any means. We all have playing skills, but the purpose of this discussion is to move it forwards and to talk about sustainability, how we can enact meaningful change in our industry. So it's an honest reflection about what we might be able to do in practice. And I'm sure you will share the belief that I have of the wonderful benefits of international cultural exchange, particularly in our increasingly polarised societies. But I think what a debate that will define the rest of our careers is how we balance that with our responsibility for the planet. So we'll be discussing practical measures, we'll be discussing how the arts can influence the discussion and advocate for change, and looking at systemic changes and individual changes. But first up, I'll have some introductions. So I'm Henry Southern. I work at Harrison Parrott in the Creative Partnerships and Tours Department. And by way of introduction, I'll go around the panel here. We thought it would be fun to start with a confession. So there's a great podcast in the UK called The Guilty Feminist. And is anybody familiar with the Guilty Feminist podcast? Maybe just a UK thing. But anyway, they start by having confessions by saying, I'm a feminist, but. And so my wife might say, I'm a feminist, but Henry, I love it when you take the trash out, for example. So in this case, I'm an environmentalist, but I work in international touring, and I love to eat avocados. And I'm going to go to you first.
I'm an environmentalist, but my family uses my car and brings me out from the wilderness. Can't live without it.
Fantastic. And so you'd be lovely to hear more about your role as a welcome by opera, and more generally about your credentials for talking about this topic. So you're project manager there?
Yes, I'm a project manager at the Göteborg Opera in Gothenburg, Sweden. And I think I'm invited because we made a very special sustainability project in connection that we put up Wagner's cycle.
Yes, and we'll be talking more about that later for sure. Next up, Simone Reinig from the Zerkman. Now, as of this morning, there was always going to be a panel of four, that's myself steering the discussion, two of which had COVID, but Alex and Simone kindly stepped up and are saviours, so thank you very much for that. But hopefully we'll contract COVID as well. But so I'd love to hear more about you.
Well, my guilty or pleasure that I came by plane games. I should have taken the train but for the rest, I'm quite serious about this issue, and I try to do as much as I can in terms of traveling, what I eat, heating the house, and that sort of things. I always walk the bike when I can use my bike or walk. But in this industry, there's quite a lot of room for improvement. Absolutely.
So are you a vegan?
Not a vegan, but I'm what we call a flexitarian, so I eat less. When I can choose, I won't eat meat.
Okay, yeah, much the same. We're going to unpack more about the industry elements soon. Alex, I don't think you need an introduction, but what's your confession?
So my confession is that I love to fly. I really do. So I feel what I get to play. And I also love big concerts and big orchestral events. And I love my food as well. I'm more of a pescatarian. But occasionally somebody puts it in front of me, I'll eat something. I haven't eaten problem with that.
Fair enough. Thank you for being so honest. Marcus?
Oh yes, I don't like avocados, but I like Argentinian meat and California wine, and yes, I ordered online, so even worse. And I still know the Kennedy car, which is my between children. Yeah, it's important. It's a bit conscious, yes.
Well, thank you for indulging me with that. And as I say, we're approaching this topic humbly, and I think, like you described it very well, I'm sure there's necessarily the point of context, but there's an ambition and reality gap. And I think there's a genuine ambition from musicians, from management, to do more on this topic, but starting point, the elephant in the room is touring. Now, an approach to this when it comes to sustainability is avoid, reduce, and offset. Now, if we avoid, that means we're doing no touring. If we reduce, there are many different methods we can discuss in more detail on offsetting, which touched on in more detail as well. But so as a starting point, Marcus, Bamberg Symphony is a touring orchestra. The majority of your work is touring. How can you approach this credibly when touring is such an important part of your work?
Well, more or less we are lucky incorporated guilty here on the stage, because the orchestra has been founded for touring around in Germany and in the world since 1946 when it was founded. And it's a huge orchestra. We have 111 players in the orchestra. We are working and living in a small city in Bavaria, which is Bamberg, 75,000 inhabitants. 10% of which are subscribers to the orchestra, but this only gives us 30% of our concerts in Bamberg. So this means 2/3 of the concerts have to be outside and should be outside, and that's where we get the money for the subsidies for. This goes from concerts in Bavaria, in major concert halls in Germany and Europe, up to international touring. But of course, the last 2 years we haven't been touring internationally, but we have been thinking about how we can make touring a bit greener. And again, Alex, you have shown some measures, some ideas that we can do. I think a big idea is to have residences abroad. I think, of course, routing is an issue. Just taking direct flights, trying to take trains instead of trains wherever this is possible. But still, we feel that we need to go abroad, and we need also to take the culture abroad and not stay at home, because, well, for us it's our work, but also for the other artists around. I think we have to do this cultural exchange in the world now more than before.
So it's interesting you're saying that touring is a key part of what you do, and your funding is also linked to that. Is there an element of, you're saying, a chicken and egg? So you, as you said, your funding stipulates you have to tour, but equally you're probably telling your funders it's important for us to tour in order to get the name out there. So is that cyclical?
Well, the funding is state money from Bavaria, from the government, and it's state money for well, we call this Bavarian State Philharmonic, is a surcharge of the orchestra, more or less. So it's one of the big cultural events in Bavaria. And part of this is to tour around the world and to show the quality of this orchestra to the world, and to show the glory of the Bavarian state. Of course, it's part of this, and also during the last 2 years we have had other types of success without touring internationally. We have been streaming a lot in partnership with many GTV, and have been sending 4 or 5 concerts every season there with about 80,000 viewers per concert. Especially in the same destinations we would have been touring. We have done much more CD and radio recordings than before, and also interesting projects. During the lockdown, we recorded all versions of Brooklyn 4 in November 2021. Well, we said that Bamberg and didn't know what to do in Bamberg, so Shelley said, well, I want to go into this Brooklyn 4 project. Now there's books, a project you would never have done before, and this leads to success on another level. We get this ICMA award for this. So there is different parts of success also outside of touring. I think touring has still to be a part, but maybe a more meaningful part.
Last question before I move on to this stuff. So it sounds like COVID has enforced some positive change, but will that change last?
I think so.
So you will shift your emphasis of your work to perhaps fewer tools, more digital?
Well, we're more relaxed now about touring.
Okay.
Because pre-COVID, we were like, okay, you have to go to Asia every second year, you have to go to the US every second or third year, you have to go there, in this very strict frame of touring. You have to be exactly what you can so that's about. We're more relaxed, and we're now looking what makes sense. Will it take place or not? Even for next year, we're planning for a tour to Asia. I don't know if it will be already possible.
You'll be there with that.
And well, if it's not there, then we'll not get later. So. And we always have plan B and plan C and plan D at the moment. Like many of you as well.
Absolutely, and actually with that in mind, you're forewarned I will be coming to the audience shortly for questions, so by all means raise your hand. We've got Amelia and Sophie here with microphones. Both Marcus and Alex, as I had mentioned, residency models. Is that something you're considering at the Conservatoire?
Well, I'm not responsible for the orchestra,
but for the invitation?
Yes. Well, first of all, I don't think we should approach this issue humble. We're no longer in a position to be humble. And the issue is crystal clear, and I think the solutions are crystal clear. The first question I have is, what is a realistic target? What should we have as a target? It's a little bit strange to see that the majority of all the people here are now next door doing business, which I do understand, but it seems to be part of the problem that they're not aware enough, maybe, that the real issue is this. So it's extremely important. So the first thing I think we should make more clear is what could be our part of the solution. And less touring is crystal clear, less flying is crystal clear. And in my view, the problem is that this is a global issue, whereas the politics, the people who are in charge of the world, is defragmented. So we don't have a world government, and maybe this organization, could be part of it. We may have a sort of logistical department in which we can tap into to make it work, that we can work on a more intelligent basis, to avoid flying, to have more intelligent schedules, because it's such a multifaceted, extremely difficult logistical issue we have to deal with. It's not only about the orchestras and the ensembles and the soloists, but it's also about the availability of the halls. And especially halls like the Conservatoire in Amsterdam, we have over 930 events per year, which is quite a lot. So to fit this all in this multifaceted logistical issue requires a totally, sort of global or maybe European logistical system. And yes, a different approach might help, where lesser tours, more concerts of one and the same ensemble or orchestras. I believe in it, but then we should do more in the same country with top-notch orchestras. I think also maybe we have to have a different approach when it comes to competition.
That was going to be my next question. Firstly, I completely agree. This whole debate is multifaceted and nuanced. But I would the Conservative to relax exclusivity clauses to allow an orchestra from abroad to go to other places that normally too close.
Well, let's say 50 kilometers or something, that's 80, whatever. But I believe the more the merrier also.
Okay, good to know. So in Gothenburg, we'll talk more about your work with the ring cycle shortly, but touring as well, I know, for the opera is an important part of the work, and with the ballet as well.
Yeah, it's a dance company that has become, during the years, become very, very good. It's actually world class. It means that the best dancers want to work with us. And when the best dancers are in our company, the best choreographers want to work with us. But the touring is necessary for this, because it's not so attractive just being Gothenburg dancing. So it's a sort of wheel, and they are really, really good actually, and they are invited from all countries, all over the world right now. And this is of course the big issue for us when it comes to traveling, because otherwise we don't travel very much ourselves. But as it is right now, we are not talking about about not touring. This is our mission from our owners. We are a wholly owned company by the taxpayers, by the southwest region in Sweden. And it would also be sad if we couldn't go on doing this fantastic art. We have to go on making the best art for the people in the world. So we are trying in all ways to, for example, work with the travel agencies, give us alternatives. We have a problem from Sweden that we can't book a good train routes in Europe because the train companies doesn't fit together and we don't have the travel agencies that can handle it. So we are trying to put pressure on the travel agencies to give us alternatives. We are trying to find them ourselves. We can, for example, easily take the train to Copenhagen and fly from there if we are going far away. And then we can at least have a flight, travel without stopovers. So there are details that you can work with all the time. And just before the pandemic, we had 2 groups that was about to start. And one was the dancers themselves, who really wants to have a single footprint. They are young, and their children and their grandchildren should live for many years. And so they really want to do something for themselves. And then we had another group, it's my department with the project managers who handle the travels for all our guests, your friends, the conductors, the singers, who has to travel to work, actually. And we want to work together with them as well. We don't want to work just with people live close to Gothenburg. So we have to find solutions, and I'm sure we can. We are very good at imagination. We are a fairy tale factory, and we can for sure find new ways of doing things. So the pandemic stopped it because we had to just survive for 2 years. But now we will continue, and we really want to reach out hands to orchestras and other touring companies to see what are you doing, can we go together and find solutions and put pressures on people who need that. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic to hear, and it resonates with what I was just saying about the spirit of partnership. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was also, you mentioned about specific tools, but when we've spoken in the past, I was really fascinated about your approach, which is your ambition of the approach to have a sustainability budget more holistically. So, for example, if you brought a far-flung area of the world, you then might make concessions in the other world in order to be safe for that.
It could be like that if we can find good solutions for touring in Europe, then we can actually go to Australia, as we are doing next season. We can't isolate Australia and New Zealand, for example. We need to see them. So then we have to work harder, but it may be difficult to have a climate budget for each season because it's random from which country you get invited. So yeah.
It's not only about climate, fine, we should reduce CO2. But on the other hand, we should also think about partnerships with World Wildlife Fund, for instance. We team up with other organizations that we spend for every 1,000 kilometer by plane, invest 1 or 2 euros in this club. So you have to approach this holistically. It's not only about our own sector and trying to reduce, but also trying to compensate. And it could be somewhere else, because it will take years before we are able to compensate, to reduce our CO2 use. And that's everything to do with the way we produce energy, the railway system, logistics that will take time, the way we insulate our holes. So that is a long-term issue, and we have to be successful in the short term, and trying to compensate as much as we can is also an approach, I think.
Yeah, so Alex, you might add to this, I think it touches on offsetting as well, which we have to see on the planets.
Yeah, so I think the answer to this is that we want to basically create a positive feel and as well as the creative process. So I love you said that fairy tales. So it's like I think we need people with imagination in these organizations, or your organizations, think about ways in which they can make sustainability part of the story of what it is you're trying to achieve in your performances and ways in which you are thinking about doing things that will actually benefit the planet or harm the planet going forward. And that's going to be the narrative for so many organizations that you don't do it. I think people will actually start to feel hesitant about wanting to engage or wanting to do things. I think music is such an incredibly important incredibly important medium for being able to talk about the issues of the planet and sustainability. So I think your business is just like the most amazing business to be in right now. And artists are thinking about it. So the head of an opera company in Washington, D.C. contacted me because she wants to commission 2 operas on the issue of climate change. People are starting to think about how do we actually weave this into the narrative of the art itself, as well as in how we perform. So I think that will actually invigorate people, make people feel enthusiastic about engaging, being part of it, and particularly young people who are seeing.
If there's one sector with enough imagination, it's ours. If there is one audience that is awareness, it's ours. I was just thinking about it during the discussion. We might seriously consider if we could make this issue a part of our mission statement. And that's a real step. But having heard all this, knowing how serious the situation is, it has to be part of our strategy at least, and maybe even part of our mission statement. Because what is a world without a world? We're all gone.
That's exactly we have done as well, put this in our mission statement as well, part of our preserve and creation. And what we are planning to do is now, what you mentioned, compensation from carbon dioxide. We want to compensate in the destinations we are going to and see if there are projects, local projects, where you can really make a footprint, and then we want to try to just put it into the orchestra style, so that everyone in the audience has to read it, to be honest. And I think we have a big audience. Every night it's 2,000 people sitting in the concert, reading our program. So you can put a little mission also in
And educate.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, when we started the project 5 or 6 years ago, so we managed to reduce the CO2 30% with as old as this one. And the funny thing is, first of all, we had to convince our employees, now it's the other way around, say it's only 30%, come on. Yeah. And this is where you want to end up, which is good. Yeah. But the last 20-30% are the most difficult.
Yeah.
But that have to, doing nothing is no option.
I think that, can I just propose, I think that's, when you look at those numbers, and the big numbers, and how large they are, and actually look at the bits to do with aviation, or the bits to do with your part of aviation, they may not seem very much, by comparison. But I think the problem is that this is something that needs huge political will, and everybody's got to feel they've got some stake in the future of the planet, and actually commit to it. So they're all doing their bits. It sounds like what you, not very tasteful to say, but it sounds like you're going to war. But actually you are. You're actually trying to take the future of this planet seriously and get to grips with this massive issue, because the future of humanity depends on it. So I think if just everybody being involved in that sense of incredibly strong message.
But our share is relatively small. I think what we can reduce is the educational side, we can how to reach out with this issue to our audiences. That has much more impact than just trying to improve our own logistics.
And that would be more overt, for example, the Washington National Opera is saying commissioning pieces specifically on this topic, or perhaps all sorts of ways of saying Marcus fine. So you're just trying to play, you're suggesting that when you're touring to a location, offsetting schemes, for example, would then benefit that particular location. Is that right? Okay. And just to come back to this, so you were saying offsetting is unregulated. It's a little bit, I don't know, people understand to be a bit nervous about it. For example, the tree planting is actually very critical. Is that just a concern?
Well, there are a variety of things that need to be considered. Firstly, partly our understanding of how to treat the carbon cycle in terms of what gets put in the ground and stays in the ground, or how effective trees are in dealing with the problem. Those are things where the science is still done in some ways. So, I mean, there are obviously very enthusiastic about trees. That's great. Seeing as the solution may not be that there isn't going to be a big difference, as some other executives have said. I think is misleading the public about where we need to go. So when it comes to carbon offsets, there are a variety of people who propose schemes, and they're trying to provide that, if you like, that currency for dealing with the climate problem. And there's no question that in the long run, that will be needed. There needs to be some kind of recognition of the cost of carbon and the price of carbon, regulation of carbon. And of course, the European Union is doing a tremendous job thinking about this right now. But it's a revolving subject where some schemes that are being proposed are simply not, they're not regulated, and also it's not obvious exactly how reliable they are in terms of making a difference to the carbon.
And is it an open special topic? Isn't it a little bit too easy? I mentioned the avoid reduce offset model. Actually, the cost offset at all is negligible in the grand scheme of, I don't know, 6-figure orchestral projects.
Or you can do it voluntarily, for instance, when you buy a ticket for an airplane, and you can choose to pay extra for the compensation scheme. We might ask the same for audiences. And in a later stage, we'd like to be mandatory and say, okay, there will be extra €2 or pounds on top of it, just for this whole program.
So that's something you're asking.
Well, it might be the way, because it will cost money in the long run, one way or the other.
I think it's cheap, still too cheap to do this offset thing. We had to fly to Paris because the train was stopped. And there was constructions on the train, so we had to pay the plane. And for the full orchestra, Marvel went to Paris and we paid like 800 euros.
Yeah.
So it's more or less ridiculous. Of course, if you go to Asia or to the US, then it's a bit more than we are. 10,000 euros maybe. But still, the problem that we are facing, and also my other colleagues in the orchestra, is that the politics are still not as far as they should be. So we are not allowed to spend the subsidies, the tax money, on compensation, because that's tax money we get for cultural purposes and not for ecological purposes. So I have to get this from donors or from sponsors or whatever. That's a bit complicated, at least in Germany. Every city, every state has different measures for it.
Then we have to make it clear, we should not be humble, we should be realistic. What is the target that we have to set for our sector? And how much will that cost? Can we work that out? That's where we have to start.
I feel that I am commissioned coming on. I thought it was very nice seriously.
Maybe together with some laws or ISPA. There is no alternative. We have to set a very clear target, what we need to achieve.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll have many more talks and great fun, but nothing will happen.
Just so you're aware, not those already, so Zoe and Amelia here are calculating the carbon footprint of everyone travelling to the conference. And on Wednesday evening, they will announce the total carbon tonnage and the amount of cost offset. Have I said that correctly? Right, so watch this space. I think it's a fantastic initiative. So we've touched a little bit on, well, we've talked more broadly about specific measures, how we might be able to reduce through different routing, through referencing models, through relaxing exclusivity, and then also about how the art form itself can influence change. So Anna, I'd love to come to you here about this fantastic, sustainable green cycle.
Yeah.
And yes, please come to
It was our former artistic director, Stephen Langridge, who is now at Glasgow. When he came to our house, at first he was very impressed by the sustainability work that was already done, and he wanted to contribute as an artist, as an artistic director, and also as a director. So the management talked, and they came up with a suggestion to do the recycling because the mess is very easily connected to the climate. Because the story is taken from the earth and greed and total disaster at the end. But we decided to have a little bit of hope in our performance. So we did, the unique thing for us was that this was, the idea came from actually the creative team and the management, the artistic management, which made what you said, we had to go in from the beginning. We went to the project, all of us, with the sustainability in front of the eyes. And it wasn't easy, because it's not easy because it was a very professional team and they had high ambitions when it comes to art. And sometimes it really clashed. But most, we investigated, we were testing new, better colors, we were testing better makeup. We chose to make the walls in the set of OSB boards, which is already from the beginning, wooden waste. And we made a lot of decisions when it comes to choosing materials in the beginning. And then there was a pandemic, and it made everything very difficult. So it's a bit postponed, but at the end I can see that we did a lot of good choices, and what we are doing now is to change our production process and to involve the question about sustainability as it has to be sort of in our DNA, I would say. It should also be there, and for me personally, I thought before I went into this production, I thought that sustainability is something for workshops and wardrobes that will find good materials. I can't do anything. I have totally changed my mind. I can do a lot by being a project manager. For example, we're working now with all departments in the house to put in our technical handbook that we can send out to the creative team designers. Where we talk about how we want to work and things that we try to avoid and try to get a common point from the beginning, like we did in the ring. And we work with the production, but we also work with the audience. For each part of the ring, the marketing department made a campaign. So, for example, for the first part, when we are taking the gold from the Rhine, they put the question, what is the gold that we are taking from Earth today? And they landed in mobile phones. So we asked the audience to bring all their own mobile phones and put them in a box in the foyer, and there were heaps of them. And then we sent them to recycling. This was the first way to get the eye on that we can actually use art. Just tell the story about the destruction, but also to engage the audience. And the next, for the Valkyrie, we talk about heroines and heroes, and then we put the question to the audience, are you a climate hero? And they would tell us what they would do in their private life to make less footprint. And then they could read tickets and three-course vegetarian dinner in the restaurant. And we try to make some fun of it, to make it attractive, and also to put pressure on ourselves to continue being a sort of a greenhouse, which we are actually aiming for. Now we have ended the performances, and what we are doing now is we have done two very nice things, which is also kind of publicity for the thing. We have taken the boards that I talked about, the OSB boards, and we were hoping that we could put them in earth again by making biocarbon. But we have painted them, so it didn't work. But the farmer who is doing this biocarbon in our region, he said, well, bring it to me. I need some material to build a wall in my storage, and I will give you charcoal. So we went there with a horse 2 weeks ago. We had 2 big bags of charcoal, and we brought them to the agriculture school in the region, and they will use it in their cultivations. So we had a ring cycle in the region. And this is of course publicity. It's a very little thing, but it makes it fun, and it's attractive for the press in the region to write about, and we press well.
So you make a circular region.
Yes, circle. There was a tree from the beginning. In the Nibelungen string there is an ash tree from where Walden gets his sword, and there was a dream from the team that we should plant ash trees at the end. And then we found out that there is an ash tree disease all over the world that actually kills all the trees. And we don't want to plant trees that die. But after 3 years, we get in touch with the University of Agriculture in Sweden, and we found some people who was actually scientists who works with finding growing a resistant ash tree seedlings. So now we have 30 ash tree seedlings in South Sweden growing, and in June we will plant them in the region, in areas where the ash trees has actually died.
Wow.
So this is also for biodiversity, which is one of the goals in our region. And I want to say also that we have an advantage because we are owned by the region, the taxpayers, because Sweden is a part of the United Nations that put up 17 goals for sustainability. Yes. Puts a pressure on Sweden to do something, puts a pressure on the region to do something, puts a pressure on us to actually do something. And so I think we have a good collaboration with our owners, and it's absolutely necessary to have the management and the owners on the same track as you are. Really.
That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. The depth you went into with that production element of the makeup, linking it artistically, but also engaging audiences. And so you were saying how it was fun for the audience. Do you think they were receptive because it was fun, or should we answer the question more broadly? Should it be shocking and boring and being a bit more overt with this very serious issue?
I think you have to do both.
Stick and carrot.
Yes. Are there any other examples of that in mind? I mean, for example, your programming was have you had any themes relevant to this at all?
Not yet. I think there was some concepts, but not in general. I think it should be something you have to do as part of your total artistic identity. Otherwise it won't work. To make it even more complicated, because that's what we are here for, there's not only a technical element, but there's also a social element, and knowing that diversity and inclusivity is a very important part of our task for the upcoming decades. It is likely that there will be more touring from other regions of the world, so I think it's quite difficult for us to reduce it largely. So the compensation schemes are all the more important, I think, in the near future, because the whole social tissue, as we know, is really defragmenting in the world currently. So we can't deny that as well. So we have to include this, and we have to compensate it somewhere else. It should be one entire program for our industry, I think.
Rather than isolated elements.
Yes, it's multifaceted, and we have to do everything that we can do. We have to be aware of it, but we can't solve it entirely on our own. So we have to be clear on that we need some compensation programs. And well, teaming up with other organizations might be a part of the strategy. Not the entire, but a part of the strategy.
And that's again is the element of partnership, which is picked up in those very important. But Anna, you were talking about how your owners, the local central governments, are engaged with it, which sounds like it's a real Marcus, you were talking earlier about how we've had some challenges with Bavarian government in that respect. Should we be doing more than this, to lobby for change? I mean, how are you approaching this issue?
Well, I'm trying to put this topic on whereby in the discussions with politicians, we are a foundation with different stakeholders. So there's the main part is the government of Bavaria, but there's also the city of Bamberg and some regional institutions. So I've got a lot of talks to different politicians of different political color, to say so. And it's a bit complicated because there's also competition. So for another example, at the moment, the Green Party in Bavaria, they are engaging in green culture now as well, because the federal program, Green Culture Deal, they want to establish, and they offer a free carbon survey of our institution about the concept or the emissions and all of this. And I had to ask the government in Munich if we are allowed to do this, and then they started to discuss this, and they put it into the Landtag, into the parliament for small discussion about this. At the end, they say, oh, our cultural institutions, they don't have enough people to do this, they are so busy with work, and they should be bothered with kind of extra work on this. But we will take care of this. We CSU party. So, next year, I bet they will come out and say that it's their idea, and then it will, but yes, it's a lost idea. And that's the problem. And also, the other areas, also, builders who start if we are eco-conscious on true. So we have to do something, we want to do something, but it's complicated. Always to put on the trigger all the time to hear politics.
I see findings on a federal bureaucratic level, there seems to be some barriers there before we gradually break those down. Well, yes.
No, I think America's, I believe, is so polarized, or should try. And so I think, having said that, increasingly people in America, including senators, are actually, on both sides, are actually getting understanding the criticism and they're getting involved in actually trying to, as part of what we try to do at the Earth Institute is to engage members of both parties in the issues and try to provide solutions for them to propose in government. And we find that actually if they don't work, because we're a public Senate, so we'll get urgent now to propose our carbon tax. But at the same time, eventually, 5 years later, somebody will come on and say, well, what we really need is a carbon tax. And so, I think it's building up momentum on issues politically is very important. I think in terms of the way this gets played out across America, in terms of climate action, is it's the states and the citizens that have really grasped the opportunity and responsibility for doing something about climate change. And it's partly because places like New York City was affected by Hurricane Sandy, so they're very aware of it, this issue. California's been affected by wildfires and drought, they're very aware of it. And so people, regardless of their political persuasion, have long, in certain citizen states, have long recognized the need to find a good way to deal with this. And that includes in parts of America where industries, oil and gas or coal, they're being threatened with big amount of power. But the city leaders and the state leaders are recognizing they've got to transition, they've got to find ways of giving a positive solution. So I think we've turned a bit of a corner in America. I hate to say that, but actually I think things are actually starting to look more positive in terms of, not regardless of who's in power in the White House,
the way the system states actually get to grips with the issue. The other thing I think to say is that in the case of a place like New York, where there's a ton of money, increasingly people are concerned to use their money in a way that, in philanthropic ways. Of course, America is far more heavily into philanthropic support of the arts than many other parts of the world. But they actually do want to see action on these problems. So it's in a company's interest, an organization's interest, to actually show that it's putting sustainability front and centre and is thinking about the future. So I was talking about Expound earlier, Expound runs the Share, which is this new multimedia arts venue on the West Side of Manhattan. And what the opportunities are. I mean, for example, he's got a major art exhibition. He's got Thomas Saracino, who's from Germany. He's doing this amazing series of art installations using natural spines to inspire silk. They're just phenomenal. Amazing to see these things. And he does other things as well. But we talked about why don't we use this as a platform to engage the public more broadly about the issues of the environment and sustainability, which is Thomas Saracino's big thing. So we've actually started some panels, where we come and engage with people at the show and talk about the issues of the environment and sustainability with people from across New York who want to come along and talk about with the backdrop of this exhibition getting
Cross services.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about also with Coming Hall, doing something similar. I think there are lots of opportunities to get established dialogue with the public around these around these issues and actually use the arts as a way of highlighting and communicating the issues.
I have a very simple proposal for all the colleagues here from the If we receive a proposal from an agent as a concert hall, what is the footprint proposal?
Of the email sent.
No, not of the email, from the tour you're suggesting.
Yes.
Make visible what the footprint is per tour from the outset. And what does it cost to compensate it? So make it visible, that's the first step, I think.
And then you then proposing that you would pay for the offsets.
I don't know whether we are able to start. Make it visible. Yes.
I suppose also that requires some regulation and continuity to how that is assessed. To understand what the different parameters are. I think it's a really interesting idea.
It's very simple.
But then also gradually the industry will have to know what is relative. You might see it as, I don't know, 100 carbon tons of electricity instead. But then you might think that's a lot, but actually it's not very much at all with things. So we need to learn what kind of industry.
It's an incentive also for the industry to be as smart as possible, because if you have a very intelligent setup of the tool, it will be lower per hall.
Yeah. And as you say, all the discussion about how those halls also
has to be made visible in the first place and make us aware of what we're talking about. What the solution could be.
Yeah.
These things are going to be serious as well. The main danger with some of these things is, I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but I think you have to do it very seriously and thoroughly, because otherwise people will accuse you of greenwashing and actually there'll be sort of backlash. So I think really it's a great idea at the same time. I think doing it really well is massively important.
And are there organisations who recommend that the arts are, you mentioned Judith Bicycle?
I'd take a look at Judith Bicycle and see what they've got to offer. There are other organisations as well.
And Kew Gardens published last year their 10 golden rules of reforestation, which is very insightful as well. Now, I've got a couple of hands up. There's Barbara there, I think. Sorry for not spotting you earlier.
Thank you so much. This is really fascinating. And I must say, as an office manager, that I do calculating not just the budget, but also the things that are intimidating. I think it's an idea we're looking at. is one of the 7 sins of our industry. And I'd like to really explore perhaps offsetting the carbon offset issue by a number of days spent in one location. Because I think, first of all, it's silly for somebody to travel halfway around the world or even halfway across the continent and to perform only once in any one place, and to perhaps travel with more than one program, perhaps travel and to go to the main concert hall, perhaps the cafeteria, or in Cipollini used to play at the cafeteria at the Fiat factories. I mean, to go to places where people are rather than finding places where they have to travel to get to you, to go to places where people can find, whether it's hospitals or boarding schools, or to find, I mean, things that we do anyway, but we think of it as more limited, on a more limited scale. I think the most memorable activities and touring experiences, artists that I work with, situations where they sink into a community and find a variety of ways in which they can interact and share not just perhaps their musical performance, but other kinds of knowledge that they bring as human beings and as musical professionals. And it's a challenge to musicians, it's a challenge to halls, it's also a challenge to sponsors, whether it's private or public sponsorship, to say, this is important. Include this idea of expanded kinds of engagement in one place. So when we talk about hub and spoke touring, but also just deepening the connections. We used to say, think globally, act locally, or think of the planet, and increase the exposure locally, even if it's your hometown or your home area. I also want to suggest one other thought, and that is, there is a real danger of closing off cultural regions, physical, geographical regions. And one of the reasons we tour is not just the experience of the artists when they tour, but also the experience of the audience and learning something about people from other places. And Simon referred to this, alluded to it, thinking of people traveling from other parts of the world where there's been less activity, from the Middle East, from Africa, or just where historically there's been less interaction with Europe or North America, and how important that is. And I think, this is something where we want to explore other ways of enriching and not to replace the touring, but to enrich, which includes the use of video and film, which hasn't been raised here. I think it's an important dimension which has expanded so much during the pandemic, but also the importance of the creative forces, that is, composers and choreographers and the directors. And sometimes that work can be done without bringing the entire orchestra or the entire theater company or ballet company. And I remember at the very beginning of my career, I thought, it must cost an awful lot to bring an orchestra all the way across. Maybe we could just send the composer. Forget the composer, we'll just send the score. And, I don't really believe that anymore, but it is, I think, as we think about carbon costs, we can think about economies where we're talking about the creative forces and sharing these across oceans, across boundaries, across nations. Anyway, thank you so much for this, and I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on these points and others.
Thank you. I think the point about enriching the experience of the residency rather than simply not to elicit, say, 2 or 3 concerts at the main, to actually community work and complementary activities that are really important. I mean, is that something which Bangor we're thinking of, for example?
Yeah, we're planning to do this in the next tour to Asia. Especially Taiwan, they have especially asked us to provide different education concepts for different age groups, and which is interesting. First time I get this specific request. We are regularly also doing master classes with our principal players or some branch players. And it's in the overall budget of the tour budget, it's just 1 day more hotel costs plus a little being educational cost. So if you start and plan it from the beginning, it's doable, of course. And I think it's interesting also for the orchestra because they stay at the same place, they get in touch with the students, with the kids. Very, very interesting. We also learn from them a lot.
Yeah, interesting. But we should not forget being Dutch. It's also about financial issues. Yeah, it's sometimes really a challenge because of course we can't have great books, great ensemble, great service for a longer residency, but given the huge fees they're asking, it's impossible. So they have to pay their share as well, I'm afraid, if we will have to make it work. It should be a team effort. Of course, part of the solution is also to be found, at least from a financial point of view, in the fee, because I know quite a few great soloists who have great talks about environment and social skills whatsoever, but when it comes to the fees, it's non-negotiable. It's okay. What is your share?
And it's interesting also, there's an option like Bamberg or Gothenburg, it might be a luxury, but you can consider as models. But not every, with all due respect, not every orchestra will have the profile to be able to be in one city for a week, for example. And it's how you advance that rather than what is then just hearing the same bunch of orchestras or which is something which needs to be addressed. So it's another question about that. And the gentleman, sorry, it's a bit hard to see.
Hello, I'm to the Brussels Philharmonic. First of all, thank you all for touching this subject. And first of all, I plead guilty. I drive fast cars. I flew into here from Brussels. I do tour my orchestra. I brought it before COVID to Japan and to New York. So I must be guilty as man in this room, of which I'm thinking you're 30-something in this huge room, right? Now that's it. At the beginning of the session, the moderator was talking about the elephant in the room, but I have this strange feeling that you're looking the elephant in a cage and looking to the elephant as if you were in a zoo. Our colleague Simon is Dutch, I'm Belgian, and the difference between us is, I guess, is Protestant and Catholic. And I have heard as a boy that if I committed a sin, I would go to confession and things would be fine. Now that's it. All talks about compensation, etc. Sir Alex has taken us to a story of 60 million euros or something. Touring orchestras is a business of something like 60 years, not much more. And we all pretend as if we can't live anymore without touring orchestras. Now, my question that I'm asking myself, and my problem is that I don't be able to solve the problem myself, because we are in an international environment, very competitive, and as our good colleague from Bamberg said, we have to tour because we are in this competitive environment. But I don't believe that you, Luther, or somebody who nails a new sharp on the doors of our concert halls, because the numbers are not, I mean, they are not relative, they are very, very real. So I don't think that we actually should ask ourselves, why do we tour? Why do we tour? In Amsterdam, just as in Brussels, we have fine orchestra that can play Brahms for local audiences. Why do we need to visit? Why do I have to come to Amsterdam to play Brahms or Mahler? You have much better orchestras than mine over there. So basically, I would suggest that we really think all together that it could be a wonderful place that Jana, or a wonderful job that Jana could take the lead, that we really need to sit together and come up with something really strong to, the signal from our industry to make a real shift and change that is real and not compensation, because compensation is shifting from one problem to the other.
Absolutely, so it's very much an ethical, moral discussion. I mean, Alan and Mark's both said that tooling is fundamental to your activity, so how do we balance that out from the practicalities to get the point? It's a tricky balance.
The fun thing about this is that 50, 60 years back, before horses started reinshoring, it was more a regional or maybe a national market. And the orchestras and ensembles had their own distinct artistic profile. You could easily recognize the sound of the piano as opposed to the concerto or the Berliner Philharmonic. It was entirely different. Nowadays, it's changed more into an international market, so the differences between the orchestras are gradually getting less and less. So it's a very good question how we should approach it from an artistic point of view. That's maybe the first reason why we should approach it. And then we should think also, okay, given this situation, is it worth doing orchestras and can we reduce it or not? And it also has to do with the profile of our halls, because we here in the Tonhalle have a very international orientation, and then the other capitals in Europe has more or less the same kind of hall. So it's a deep and, in my view, primarily artistic issue that we have to crack.
But isn't there also audience appetite? There's the excitement of having, of course, the LSO episode.
But then they should have a distinct profile. That if you know that the Mariinsky is not coming anymore, I'm afraid, but the LSO is coming, or the Wiener Philharmonic are coming, then you know you can really look forward to something unique because they have their own artistic profile with a unique repertoire, with a unique conductor. But when it's no longer unique, then we have the question.
But the conductor is a good point. Because I feel lots of the jury is conductor-driven business as well. So the audiences want to see this conductor of the topics. And you know, we were consolation because they want to hear the orchestras. And they don't want just to stay with their own orchestras over there. Yeah. But you're right, it needs a profile, and I think this touring will be reduced if you don't have good arguments to do it. Also to be
artistic reason for
one reason we have a rich cultural offering in Europe. I mean, even in the US, there's only one main symphony orchestra in each city. There's 5 symphony orchestras in London, so it's hard to have it, which is a great point. However, before we come to the end, wrapping up, there's one more question because the audience is there.
Yeah, hello, I'm Lars Heidelberg from Copenhagen, and I just shot a question also. And I agree totally what Barbara said, and also here. But the question is it necessary for music to travel so much for you? Is it the music that is the center of what is it? But I think the music will be there. But you can be there without touring out. So is it necessary for the industry that orchestras and musicians shall tour that much as they do right now?
I mean, is it necessary for the music to tour?
We don't do very much with the music, it's dance companies, yeah. But I think that we need each other, we need to see each other, and we need to find a good way to do it. For example, our company, I talked about from the management, dance management, and we talked about if we can take more time by going by train, for example, which is better, or not for Saglas. And she said, well, it will be hard because we are planning every second stage 1 year in advance. Of course we can. We don't have to be in such a hurry. We need to have people supporting us with money because it's more expensive, like you say. I'm absolutely sure there are ways, but I don't think we should have in our mind not to travel at all, not seeing each other. I was supposed to go with our dance company to Russia now in June, which is of course cancelled. But I can really feel sorry about that we can't go there. And when I have here the despair from them, of course it's closed now. I think we should try to find good ways to go on seeing each other and get inspired. I think so.
So in terms of talking about sort of music, I mean, say with Bambo, for example, if you have an 8-song tour by the 8th concert, you really embed in that music. So actually maybe in response to that question, yes, it does.
Yeah, I agree. Also, from the repertoire, you want to hear Strauss with the Texas Staats actually, and Mahler and Bamberg over about. So I think the music has to travel, and the works have to travel as well in order to get them internationally into the competition. And yes, if we do 8 or 10 concerts in a row, the quality of the music is getting much better.
Final remark, maybe reacting to what you said at the beginning of the sessions, whether we should have more online visibility instead of live. I think the true nature of our profession is live. That is the core of our business. So we can use online more as a promotional tool. It will never replace the very live event, in my view. So
That's a whole other discussion.
yes.
Just before we wrap up, there is obviously this topic is enormous. The enormity can feel quite overwhelming. I thought it would be nice to finish with a positive note, or perhaps a takeaway that people could have as a practical measure to take away and install by scope of the organisation. And I open it up and also giving up one idea to kick off, perhaps what you think, which is measuring your carbon footprint. So with Harris and Clarence, again, not perfect by any means, but we're endeavouring with a green environmental working group. And every year we measure our carbon footprint, we offset it, but we also are installing next year carbon tonnage targets to reduce that as we go forward. But that's knowing where you start, your starting point is really important. Anything else you'd like to share?
I would just say,
Oh, sorry. Was there something? Oh, sorry.
I think I'll probably take the ground here for the biggest confession. I work with a company that organises the freight of the orchestras. So I see freight, so I think I'll probably take the ground. I just wanted to say, touching on this central partnership, I think it's really important that we don't forget companies like myself or other that are on the other side. I think they need to be included in these discussions, and they need to be included in these discussions early on. We have companies come to us and ask us about carbon offsetting, but they ask us at a point in their planning where we can really only do anything in a reactive way. And I think if we involve the service providers, like travel agents, like logistics companies, etc., in these discussions from a much earlier point up the chain, then we can also, from our side, support carbon offsetting or environmental monitoring in a much more proactive way.
Thank you, that's a really good point. I think maybe with your ideas about sparkling, about just saying at the outset of the email, perhaps this is what the carbon tonnage is and how much plastic we can offset, and maybe part of that is engaging with the freight companies, travelers, etc.
Just one little sharing. As many of you may know, or maybe not, Blindwall installed their own wind generator some seasons ago, and I understand that at least 90% of their electricity is now on the road, so to speak. Just an example of something positive.
Definitely, one of the panelists who was meant to be joining us today from Tampa Concord, they installed solar panels, and yes, it was a big financial investment, but it's now proving very positive, reducing the energy bills, but also becoming more nice about philanthropists, but also more commercially as well. People want to see organisations working in this way, and so they've actually received a lot more inquiries or conferences because they're known as being a carbon neutral venue. It's very nice. But I'm leaning towards you, Alice, maybe a positive takeaway or some advice.
well, I just think this is the this is the issue of the time. We need to be thinking about the future. And this is also a wonderful way to engage. So people are becoming more and more aware of climate sustainability as an issue they have to think about. And you have an opportunity to actually make that part of your discussion, whether it's with other parts of other organisations who are involved in contracting to and asking them what they're doing about sustainability and putting a little bit of pressure on people, making it part of it. Or whether it's engaging with young people or communities, as we were hearing about earlier, in novel ways. Build up that discussion about how you can do this in a sustainable way. Because I think you'll get more engagement with people if you actually make it part of the narrative. So it should be a positive thing, actually, for your industry as well. They can think about this as something that they're actually working towards a more sustainable future for humanity. And it works. We all know that we're actually changing our lifestyle. I love flying. I don't fly as much. I love eating meat. I don't eat meat anymore. Cereal. I eat something. But we're all basically moving in the direction that we know is good. If we can actually talk to people about it and make them part of the equation, the solution, I think that actually would be incredible.
One last thing I was about to share is I think Alex was just saying, I did Al Gore's climate remedy initiative course last year, and one thing he shared, which stayed with me, is that President Kennedy was a moonshot challenge. So in 10 years, we will get massive. And it was actually achieved in 8 years. So these hugely ambitious targets can actually be reached. But one of the inspiring things was that the average age of people working in mission control was 26. So they were 18 when they heard that speech. The takeaway being, you mentioned engaging with people. We've got Zoe and Amelia doing comments today. Engaging with people, I think, is really important. So thank you for that. Thank you to Ayana. Thanks to our wonderful panel, to Athor, to Alona, to Olga, to everyone who's helped put this on.